All right, this is another casual quickie. There's a bit of a room echo. I'm still trying to figure out sound isolation, but I watched a few movies, and I'm actually recording this live just because it makes the most sense to do this right now. We'll see if we use the video portion of it. Hi, Mom, and my subscribers, I guess. But yeah, I saw a few movies. Let's talk about them. One of the films I saw was This Place Rules, the new Andrew Callahan Channel 5 documentary, where basically we interrupt your regularly scheduled Adam for an emergency. Adam, hello, I am visiting my parents in Edmonton. And when I recorded this review, it was pre-allegation for Andrew Callahan. I'm not going to go into detail exactly what those allegations are, because it will make me demonetized. Suffice it to say, I'm still posting the review in the way that it was recorded before. Just wanted to communicate that I'm aware of the allegations. I am disappointed. It is very not cool. But, you know, I watched the movie and reviewed it. And so I'm offering the same review. It was there. Interesting stuff, Edmonton. I used to live here. Anyway, thank you. Peace. Andrew Callahan has been road tripping, going to various conventions and events, interviewing people and essentially just letting them talk. And, you know, sometimes you hear something really crazy. Sometimes you hear something really genuine and like maybe profound every once in a while. I don't know. But there's a lot of character to it. There's, you know, personality in the editing and presentation on his YouTube channel. Eventually he got picked up by Absolutely, which is Tim Heidecker's production company, to continue making his YouTube content. Tim's now producing his film called This Place Rules, which is essentially just like his other YouTube videos, except this one's about the Capitol riots, but kind of not really. It's just like a collection of interviews from points that led up to the Capitol riots. So, I don't know. I was expecting a bit more of a film than just like something that felt like a YouTube video, particularly because when you have the label of like, oh, this is produced by A24 and it's an HBO documentary, like you're adding a good amount of expectation there that sure, you know, if you want to make a YouTube video and call it a movie, that's totally fine if it's on YouTube. Like, I don't know, even if it is on a streaming service, I think that there's a weird level of quality that I would be expecting from something like this that I didn't really get out of the film. And it was fun. It was a good, entertaining watch. I love his YouTube content, and so obviously I loved watching this film. But yeah, just the presentation still felt like kind of underwhelming. It didn't really feel like it was a legitimate production. There were, you know, parts where it was clear that they were self-aware about it and they weren't necessarily trying to make, you know, obviously they're not Sacha Baron Cohen. They're not making like a Borat film or anything. At the same time, it's just the things like the narration, it never really felt like super purposeful or enticing, but it was at least humorous at points. The music was not super strong, but eventually it started working better. I got used to it. It was decent. I think part of the reason why this feels like kind of a long YouTube video is because there's a lack of structure. It doesn't really feel like it's purposefully crafted together to make a documentary. It feels like they were just filming shit and then eventually said like, oh yeah, we'll just call this a movie, which is, I'm pretty sure exactly what happened. They just decided to make a movie out of existing footage and then, you know, shot a couple extra things like, oh, this is a good place for the movie to start. There are moments of self-awareness where it's like, we got my friend Josh, our research guy or whatever, and it shows a picture of him and it's just like a dude, you know, with like a keg or something, just like clearly drunk at a party or something. It's like, okay, like I understand that you're coming at this with a level of self-awareness where you're like, okay, this isn't high art or anything. But at the same time, that doesn't excuse it for not really having any kind of structure and just, you know, you could still make something more out of it, even with that level of self-deprecating humor within it. There was a scene close to the end of the film that I thought was great. It was basically the climax of the movie That felt like it justified it being a documentary. That felt like it justified the format of like, oh yeah, this is an HBO documentary and not just a YouTube video. More things like that would have helped the film a lot. It would have helped to legitimize it in a way. I wish there were more things like that in the film that seemed a bit more planned out and coordinated. Personally, I feel like I would have enjoyed this more if it were just a YouTube video. If this were the same length and it was uploaded to YouTube, I think that in terms of the implication of what you're supposed to expect out of it would have made me enjoy the film a tiny bit more. And I enjoyed it, don't get me wrong. It was fun. It was enjoyable. You can watch me watch along to it on the YMS Watch-Alongs channel. If you're interested in watching the film, you can watch it with me. And yeah, there's some stuff they included that was just kind of irrelevant, like the chicken under the RV scene. And so I was watching a scene like that where I was like, okay, if I had created this film and there's the chicken underneath the RV at that point in time, and it laid some eggs under the RV and they chased the chicken out or whatever, and it wasn't like a particularly crazy scene, but it was just like a tiny sort of like transitionary thing. I would have started the next scene with Andrew cooking eggs, because that would have been funny. It's sure you could say it's like even like a bit of a cliche or a trope, but I think that would have been like a funny little self-aware moment if the editing or filming sort of like implied like, haha, we ate the chicken's eggs afterwards, even if that wasn't necessarily what happened, just like as kind of like a joke. That would have been cool. But instead, it just kind of just goes to the next scene and forgets about it really quickly, making it so that, a tiny moment like the chicken under the RV feels less important. Like it doesn't really need to belong in the movie, It was just kind of there. Anyway, there were a lot of interesting, fascinating interviews. I wish that it got to the Jan 6 riots more quickly, but it seems like they just wanted the movie to end with that. I thought that it was going to be more about the riots, but it was just literally like, oh, here's some footage from the weeks before the riots, and then the movie ends with the riots, and it was just kind of like, okay, well, that's not the best structure. Even if you wound up creating something more and used a bunch of footage that you didn't even feel like, the Jan 6 riots, that's like one of the most documented events ever because everybody was live streaming it. There's so much footage of it. You could have used that footage and, continued narrating over top of it and said a bit more, something more substantive, or kept the narrative going, or it just felt weird that the film was advertised as kind of like a Jan 6 documentary in a sense, but it didn't really feel like that. It was just like, oh yeah, and then Jan 6 happened and that was the end. And yeah, sure, even if he didn't film the footage, if you're going to do something like have A24 and Tim Heidecker and Eric Wareheim producing and HBO, like those are all the resources that you could possibly ask for if you were going to want to do something like, oh, license other existing footage to be able to craft your documentary. Not a bad movie. It was an enjoyable watch. Please feel free to watch along the movie with me on the YMS Watch-Alongs channel. And I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. It might be on my runner-up guilty pleasures thing for 2022. I don't know. It was enjoyable for sure. All right, so I watched Babylon yesterday. I did a 3-movie day. I did Babylon, Puss in Boots, and M3GAN. So we'll talk about them in the order that I saw them. Babylon, directed by Damien Chazelle, director of Whiplash and La La Land and First Man. And Damien Chazelle's really interesting. I love Whiplash. I think it's awesome. La La Land I really enjoyed. I'd need to watch it for a second time. First Man was decent, not as memorable. And I also like that he wrote and had some involvement in the film, what was that called with Elijah Wood? What was it called? Grand Piano. That was a fun movie. And so yeah, Damien Chazelle's always really interesting, and he has like a good sort of like musical personality, obviously. He loves music. This film felt, first of all, was way too long. 3 hours and 9 minutes long. And I think that that's probably its biggest issue is the length. I feel like I easily could have cut out an hour to maybe an hour and 40 minutes out of this entire film, and it would just be a better movie. Like, there was so much going on in this movie, but you try to compare it to something like, I don't know, Boogie Nights, which also has a huge cast of characters. Way more characters in Boogie Nights. But I feel like in Boogie Nights, although, you know, there's a lot of the same, I guess, emotions being communicated, or I guess the same sort of like bombastic scale and size and energy that it's trying to emulate, I guess. It almost seems like Babylon's trying to be like Boogie Nights a bit, in ways, in scenes. Boogie Nights, it felt so much more purposeful with everything that we were shown. And that was a shorter runtime, I believe. Let me just double check. Boogie Nights is 2 hours, 35 minutes. So literally like 40 minutes, like almost 40 minutes shorter. And it does so much more than Babylon does. Like, a lot of what it's showing was raunchy and fun and, you know, generally had like excitement or tension. But after a while, it was just showing us the same thing over and over. And I was like, oh, we're having another one of this exact same type of scene where it's not necessarily important that we're having another one of these scenes. I feel like they could have just chose the better version of that scene and cut the ones that they didn't like. Easily its biggest problem is the length. Margot Robbie was pretty great in it. She did a really great job, one of her better performances in my opinion. But at the same time, you know, after a certain point, I found myself kind of eye-rolling in terms of what they were having her character do to continue being in conflict, and just like this random shit that just kept happening, and it was just like, okay, really, you're gonna do this? You know, some cliched moments and some like, oh, I'm just gonna go crazy now, or blah 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 blah. Like, it just sometimes felt like it came out of nowhere. For a movie that's 3.5 hours long, it's weird that it didn't really have any sense of narrative flow, like, at all. There was flow in the camera work. There was constantly moving camera work, and everything had, you know, a visual flow to it. There was fun, you know, some fun energy in the editing even. But narratively, it was kind of just like, why is the movie still going? What are we going towards? Why could this not have been done in less time? And that's not a great way to feel about a movie, especially one that by the end of it feels like it really thinks that it's something a lot more than it is. At the end of the movie, and this isn't really a spoiler, I don't think I've said anything spoilery that yet, but the end of the movie, essentially, it ends with like a clip show of like, aren't movies great? And like just this weird fucking editing of like, they took like all these classic cinema little like film school visuals, like the trip to the moon in the eye, and then the woman who got the eye cut open in black and white, but it was like a cow eye that they replaced, and blah, blah, blah. And then it shows like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then it shows fucking Avatar, and I was like, really? Okay, Avatar. Yeah, it was like yeah, sure, there's like technical achievements there, but yeah, it felt like kind of, yeah, weirdly self-aggrandizing, weirdly masturbatory, and just like, and it felt like it just didn't belong in the movie. In the context of the movie, it was just, it's like, that's the through line, is just like, yeah, movies are great. Like, that was it. Like, it felt like that's what it was trying to wrap itself up with as like the central theme, when I'm not sure that the rest of the film necessarily communicated that. So that's very bizarre. There was a distinct lack of strong characters, which is not good for a 3.5 hour long movie. And it didn't even feel like there were that many characters that it was trying to, you know, tell a story with. It was mostly just Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt's character. And I guess the main character, who I just completely forgot about until now, which is also not a good thing. And I forget who played him. Who's this person? I don't know their name. Oh yeah, here we go. Diego Calva, who I am not super familiar with. Anyway, so yeah, he was like kind of the main character, and then it also followed Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie, and yeah, it didn't say much, and it was really repetitive. It overstayed its welcome by quite a lot. I was wondering why it wasn't over for a long time, and it was just one of those things where it's like, okay, I know Tobey Maguire's supposed to show up near the end of the movie. And I was kind of just like, oh, it seems like it'll end. And then I had to remind myself, like, no, we haven't even seen Tobey Maguire yet. And this happened like 8 times where I was just like, we haven't even seen Tobey. So I guess the movie is not ending yet, and I don't know why it's still going. So lack of strong characters and motivations beyond a surface level. Yeah, everything was really surface level in terms of the character motivations. The score, the music was hit or miss. I like that it had a main theme. I like that it played around with a melody and expressed it in different tones throughout the film, different rhythms. But I feel like some versions of it worked better than others. I loved the slower ones, the more like piano-y ones. And then, yeah, the party-ish ones, where they were getting like the saxophone, they're like... And it was like kind of weird because it almost didn't feel like it fit in the time period. It felt like despite the technical instruments being used, it was kind of going for like this house beat, which was like very bizarre in terms of what it was like rhythmically and how it sounded. So I don't know. It just, yeah, it felt weird to me in some parts, but who knows? Yeah, there were some great energetic scenes. There was a lot of raunchy fun, some great acting here and there. The scenes never dragged on individually. So it got to the next scene in a nice, fast enough way, but because every scene was just essentially some scene that we'd already seen before, it wound up feeling really slow despite that, because it was just so repetitive. There were some genuinely funny moments. I laughed a couple times. There were some outrageous moments conceptually, but yeah, again, parts had me rolling my eyes of just like forced drama at points, and you know, it was just going through the motions, just the same thing they was already doing, and could have been edited down into a better movie for sure. The second half of the movie was exhausting, and it sucks because there's like an hour 45-minute movie in here that's like better, you know, not a 3 hour 9 minute long movie. Like it does not justify its length at all. There's absolutely it has no business being this long. Anyway, I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. It had a lot of talent behind it, but it was going in such a weird direction and it was misused. It was for the sake of just a weird, kind of pretentious project that just it seemed like it thought it was a masterpiece, and it was not. All right, another film I saw yesterday was Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and it was surprisingly great. It was a lot of fun. It had great energy. I loved the animation style, which I find kind of interesting because, what was it, the Spider-Verse movie kind of popularized the idea of, I guess, at least proving that you could be a successful mainstream major studio animated film and still have a sense of style to it and still have like an interesting frame rate. That was my favorite part about that movie, was its style. And I felt like the style really helped Puss in Boots: The Last Wish as well, although it wasn't as drastic of a like, oh, this is the only part I like about it sort of thing. Not trying to shit on Spider-Verse, obviously. There's a full review for that somewhere, but... And it wasn't just style in terms of like the visuals. There was definitely a style to how it was written and how it was presented. So this is a film where they use censor bleeps. And so any adults in the audience are obviously going to imagine the most profane things anyway. It's going to be like, oh shit, or fuck, or something like that. And there's a few points in the movie where that basically the implication is that they said that. And I find that very funny because in the context of the film, it's like, oh, fuck, is this a kid's movie sort of thing? You know, that kind of edginess is something that separated Shrek from other animated films when Shrek came out. That was a part of its selling point, was that it was edgy and, oh, you know, this isn't just a movie for babies. You're not going to feel infantilized watching it. Adults can enjoy it too. And that's how I felt watching Puss in Boots. And it's for a different generation, so... The edginess was kind of different as well, but, you know, kind of the same, but kind of different. a different brand. It wasn't, it wasn't just like, oh, fart humor and like, haha. But yeah, that's kind of, it was kind of cute and kind of fun. And the voice acting was great. I believe, who was it? Antonio Banderas and Selma Hayek. They both did a great job with their characters. Fucking Soft Paws or whatever is back. I don't remember her name. Kitty Soft Paws. There we go. Olivia Colman, John Mulaney. Like, those are some fun people that are credited. I wasn't expecting much. I didn't really have much expectations. I watched literally every other Shrek movie except like maybe Shrek the Halls or something. Like, I don't think I watched the Christmas specials. I watched all of them, all of the ones that came in like a Blu-ray package, because we did a Sardonicast Shrek episode, and so I made sure to watch as many as possible. And so you can hear my extended thoughts on the Shrek films on that podcast episode. So 2011 Puss in Boots, I gave a 3. I thought it was like absolutely unbearable. I thought it was like really bad. Not as bad as Shrek the Third. Shrek the Third is my least favorite Shrek. It was so embarrassing. I'm trying to remember exactly what I did not like about the Puss in Boots 2011. I think something to do with Humpty Dumpty. I don't remember. I think it was just kind of lame, and oh yeah, and it was just all this weird like tropey, unsurprising, unfunny, not clever bullshit. I'm starting to remember now. They did the whole like with Kitty Softpaws character. They were like pretending as if it were like an evil dude or something. And then he was like, whoa, it was a girl. I'm like, this was so predictable. Like, obviously it was going to be like, it felt so dated even for 2011. It felt like, holy shit, that's like 2001, But this film, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, huge improvement. Narratively, the jokes are just much funnier. It feels like a nice trio of characters, the dog character and the two cats. They feel like they belong together comedically. Yeah, it was just a fun experience, and it didn't feel infantilizing. It didn't feel like it was a stupid movie for babies. It felt pretty self-aware. The humor landed for the most part. Even if the trailer, did the whole like, ooh, we're doing the cute eyes. I was like, oh fuck, come on, like that was kind of annoying, but that wasn't most of the movie. And in the context of the film, it worked a bit better than just it being in the trailer. I think that it earned its use in the film a bit better based on what the film was doing rather than just doing it for the trailer shot. What I like a lot about the animation style of the movie is not just like, oh yeah, there's like interesting lower frame rate action sequences during some shots, which is weird because I just spent a long time complaining about Avatar 2 having an inconsistent frame rate. And I feel so weird because I'm like, okay, now I'm noticing it seems like there's some shots in Puss in Boots where the frame rate is changed, but I'm not upset by it because I feel like the style in this is a bit more like kind of comic booky, where the frame rate change and how things move being different is something I'm supposed to notice about it. Whereas Avatar 2, allegedly, they did that in a way where you're not supposed to notice that it's happening. And it's not so, like, when you're watching Avatar 2, the style of the film, I'm supposed to be thinking like, oh yeah, the realistic textures and, the high frame rate, it's so high. But then it was just like, okay, well, this is like high frame rate, and then this is like a lower frame rate. It was an absolutely infuriating experience with Avatar 2. But with this, it worked so much better. Avatar 2, if a shot was a different frame rate, I couldn't understand why. In this film, when a shot is a different frame rate, I can understand why. I'm like, oh, that works really well because this is, it helps accentuate the action. What are those things called? They're like keyframes, or there's animator terms for this. I don't remember exactly what they are. When you have an action take place and you don't have it be super high frame rate, and you slow the frame rate down so that you're, what are they called? On ones, one is one every frame, and then 2 is every second frame. Something like, I don't remember the technical term for it. But essentially what you're doing is you're drawing more attention in that, in the time that you're watching an action take place, you're drawing more attention to specific poses within the movement. So rather than it just being like, whoa, it's like, bop, and then bop, and then bop. And what that does is it makes the ones that you do see, it makes it feel more pronounced. It was really interesting, and it really, really helped its style. Very comic booky, but not like overly comic booky. They didn't do the whole boom, pow, text blocks in the air. And something I also loved about the visuals is the use of color. It was a very colorful movie. It had such a varied color palette, very effectively used. There's, some scenes that are like really purpley and some scenes that are like really vibrant, or some that are, dark and red, and like everything just looked really nice. Everything looked like a cool art piece. It looked experimental in terms of what it was showing. I like seeing more animated movies, especially by bigger studios, taking these sorts of risks and being like, oh, we don't have to have everything look exactly like a Pixar movie. I'm sick of that shit. I'm sick of the homogenous sort of like, oh, there's just one way that an animated movie is supposed to look, and it just like, it all looks so purposeless and completely devoid of personality. So I like that this film has a personality. And although I brought up Spider-Verse, I don't watch this movie and be like, oh yeah, this is Spider-Verse. Like it doesn't, it separates itself enough, and it has its own distinguished personality, and it really helps it. I think that the sense of humor and the general tone and self-awareness and what it's going for story-wise is very different, obviously, than Spider-Verse. Yeah, what else do I have in my notes? Yeah, there's like implied death. It feels like kind of edgy and mature. Like there's scenes where it's like, okay, that guy just died. Or like, whoa, that guy just died. Like, and that was kind of cool. Like, I think that happened a couple times in the original Shrek movies, but like some of the deaths are like, whoa, like, wow, like it feels like there's a bit of danger. And, the film is centered around the idea of death. There's a character that's actually playing death in this movie too, which is really interesting. And it feels like a generally mature, easily watchable kids movie that, it doesn't feel like I'm watching something stupid, terrible. It has a good sense of humor to it. And there's parts like even with the death character, when they show up, it's like successfully intimidating. It's not just like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. Like, I would argue that there's two villains in the film. One is played by John Mulaney. That one is less of an actual, it doesn't feel as threatening. It's, they're just kind of played off as like, oh, they're an absolute psychopath, but they're not as like intimidating as the death character. And I like that they had both those villains because they really kind of filled in for what the other was lacking. I like that there was a character, a villain that wasn't really played for laughs, and it was kind of intimidating and, frightening in some ways, especially when it comes to the design and just the overall feel of it, and the sound design, that whistling, that or whatever the fuck was going on there. I love, that they had those moments of style just reincorporated to kind of get you as the audience member to feel that same sense that the main character was feeling. Like, ooh, like hair stand on end, kind of like, uh-oh, you hear the thing. I wasn't like terrified. I wasn't like shitting my pants or anything, but for a kid's movie, for a family movie, for something that, is probably PG. Yeah, PG. Really great stuff. And I hope they continue with this. I don't know if we need to have Shrek back. Like, we'll see what happens with that, I guess. I don't know if you could make another one of these Puss in Boots movies this good. This was a very pleasant surprise, and it was awesome to see. And I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Never would have expected that. Closer to a 7 than a 9, but it was very enjoyable. Very enjoyable stuff. The third movie we watched that day, yesterday, was M3GAN. So that's pretty fitting. It was also an Auditorium 3. So it was threes all around for M3GAN. As you might have seen on the YMS Highlights channel, I've been kind of hyped for this movie because the first trailer looked so shitty because it looked like it was trying to be way too serious. Second trailer seemed like it had a bit of self-awareness to it, and I was like, okay, what is this movie? Found out that it was from the director of Housebound, which was a decent, like, Australian horror movie, kind of low budget thing, and it was like, it It had some likable qualities to it. It had some things that I did not like about it. And yeah, produced by James Wan. I think some of the people that worked on the script for like Malignant worked on this as well. But M3GAN was somehow a disappointment. Really, really terribly directed movie. And that was its biggest problem. There were some parts that were kind of funny bad. I also heard, like, I'm gonna have to fact check this. Was this rated R initially? Okay, so apparently, yeah, it was rated R initially. Okay, yeah, so they literally did reshoots to get a PG-13 rating, which is kind of annoying. But, okay, so I'm trying to remember what I enjoyed about Housebound, and I'm pretty sure I enjoyed, like, some of the gore elements, right? And this movie didn't really have that. M3GAN, it's a PG-13 horror movie for children, I guess. And so what you're left with is the directing and the acting and the story, and all three of those were fucking horrendous. Every single performance in the movie was like really bad. It didn't even matter how major of a character they were. Every performance was absolutely fucking horrendous, except maybe the main girl, who was still bad, but I feel like she was a better actor than the movie made her look. I feel like if it's consistent throughout, where every single actor is fucking horrendous, if it's that consistent, then it's an issue. It's an issue with the directing, right? It's an issue with working with the actors. I got the impression watching the film that the main girl actor, the daughter character, that she was better than the film was making her look. Violet McGraw, we'll see if she's in another movie and if, you know, what she would do. Oh, she was in Haunting of Hill House. That's so funny. She was in Ready Player One as Shopping Cart Kid, uncredited. Okay, so we don't know who that is. Anyway, yeah, I remember Haunting of Hill House. That had some annoying child dialogue. But there's parts of this script where it's like, okay, this is clearly self-aware. There's parts of this script where it's like, okay, you're kind of making this like a kind of a joke. And that's very few and far between. So it's basically at the beginning of the movie, and then some aspects having to do with like the, you know, the company side of M3GAN and how they're like marketing it. So basically the mom character is actually the girl's aunt because the girl's parents died in a car accident at the beginning of the movie. And they're insisting and implying that this is like a tragedy and like, oh, I'm so emotionally affected by it. But they don't really successfully show it in any way. They don't really we never really feel like it's a big deal. We never really feel like the weight of her parents having died. It feels so phony the entire time where it's just like, okay, well, you're not acting like a grieving aunt at all. The mom is the worst actor in the movie, I think. She's like worse than any of the kids. The mom, who's actually the aunt. Because I was pointing out her bad acting in the trailer. Somebody said that she was a nepotism hire or something. I don't remember. I think it's Allison Williams, daughter of former NBC nightly news anchor and managing editor Brian Williams. Okay. Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, she was fucking horrendous. It was one of those things where it's like, did the director choose these actors or were they just sort of forced to work with them? Like every single actor was absolutely horrendous. Every single character, no matter how minuscule, was absolutely atrocious. And it looks like they're in other movies. Like maybe they're not the worst actors ever, but however this turned out with the director working with them, they're just absolutely some of the worst acting I've ever seen in the past like year. Yeah, so no good gore, story sucks, everything feels phony, all the acting sucks, and then the directing and editing is just fucking atrocious too. So every single shot in the film feels really uninspired, really purposeless, really like there was no reason why you put that camera there. You just kind of guessed that that's where it's supposed to go. It's like, okay, technically the actor's in the frame. And then when it gets edited together, it feels so stilted. Like, it feels like there's a couple frames extra or missing, or like it cuts so often that I'm wondering, like, even in the editing room, was there even any kind of way where you could have just let this shot that shows all three of them in the same frame play on for a bit more? is that even a possibility? Or did every single take that you filmed for the film, was that just like so short that you had to cut it in that way? Genuinely atrocious editing and directing. And so, yeah, it was just very disappointing because there was absolutely zero satisfying moments in the film. I'm watching like a part of the trailer right now where like, you know, she stabs a thing and then the thing blows up after. Like, there's characters that get away that should have died, and you know, there's no satisfying deaths. There's a satisfying conclusion of one character dying, basically. We don't really see the death. And I'm glad they killed that character. It's one of those things that I talk about often. I'm trying not to... This is a spoiler discussion, so I'll just say it. The little boy dies canonically in the film. We don't really... Like, he gets hit by the car, which is fucking hilarious. And that was probably the most satisfying moment is just the boy dying. That was probably the most satisfying moment. I can't think of any other moment in the film where I was actually like satisfied in any way. So, directing, acting, editing, overall communication, it just seems like there's such a disconnect between what the movie is trying to do or what the movie thinks it's doing versus what it's actually doing. And so you look at a scene like, there's a scene where M3GAN, the doll, is threatening the mom/aunt character. She's doing it where she doesn't want the daughter to know that she's evil and being threatening or whatever, right? So they're in the kitchen, the lights are off or whatever, and M3GAN's like, yo, I'm evil and gonna kill you or something. And the aunt's like, no, don't do that. And then the daughter comes in, I guess not able to really see what's happening. She's like, is something there? I thought I heard M3GAN. And then M3GAN says, to the mom/aunt character, M3GAN says, if she finds out, I'll kill you, I swear to God. She just says that. But she doesn't whisper it. And the scene just continues on as though like, oh yeah, that's totally normal. And the daughter still, like, if the daughter showed up because she heard M3GAN talking at that volume from outside and was like, oh, now I'm in the room, is something okay? Then why would she not be able to hear her M3GAN talking at the exact same volume? Like, all you would have to do is just whisper, have the character whisper. That would give the audience the understanding like, oh, okay, they're talking at a lower volume because they don't want to be heard. But instead, it's just more confusing because it's like, okay, well, wait, are you supposed to be... You have to figure out like, oh, you're trying to say this in a way that you're not supposed to be heard because it's just not shown. It's just not properly communicated. Just basic things like that, you know, it's really easy to get hung up on those things because it's like, this is just basic communication of information through filmmaking. It's really not anything crazy, and you're failing at doing that. She came in the room because she could hear her, so why couldn't she hear her when she is in the room then? And yeah, they were just, they talking at a normal volume, the same volume they were before. There were mild bits of humor. It was not fulfilling. A good way to put this movie is like, it kind of wanted to have its cake and eat it too, in terms of being like a self-aware, like, ooh, we're not making a serious horror movie. But then like the entire movie, just, you know, through editing choices and essentially just what it's showing, it's also trying to be a scary movie. And, you know, really early on into the beginning of the movie, there's a part where there's like a hole through the fence and there's a dog on the other side of the fence or whatever. And it's like, oh, they just couldn't fix the fence for some reason. And there's a part where, you know, the camera goes up to the fence and then on the other side, I don't even remember if it was M3GAN or the dog, but there's a jump scare and one of it comes like, you know, into the frame and then you hear that, bam! But it like, the mix was too low for it to be an effective jump scare. And so I was just like, and nothing about it was scary. It was just one of those like, somehow even for a jump scare, it was a poor quality jump scare. Somehow even for an effect that you're doing that is cheap and manipulative, you still did it in a way that was entirely ineffective. That's fucked up. It really felt like the ending came out of nowhere because by the time the ending happened, it was just like, okay, well, nothing happened. Like, there were no satisfying moments in the movie. Barely anything happened. Like, the ending literally came out of nowhere. That was so fucking, frustrating and annoying. Oh yeah, so they had, there's another robot that you can control with your gloves, like another model thing. And so, yeah, by the end of the movie, it was like, oh, now we have the other robot to beat up M3GAN, and it was obvious. It was so obviously supposed to be super cool, and it was supposed to be like super satisfying. Like, hell yeah, we get a robot, mega, dude, robot. Like, I don't. The clear implications of how I'm supposed to feel versus like, there were a bunch of people in the crowd. There were a bunch of people in the movie. I think everyone was kind of just like, okay. Like the entire crowd, just it felt like it had that vibe. Not like nobody was like, woo. Everybody was just kind of like, all right. You know, just that overwhelming feeling throughout the entire theater. Yeah, everything is cheated in visually unsatisfying ways. It barely ever shows anything. And when it, you know, unlike a movie like Funny Games, obviously, which I bring up all the time because this is a great example of it, showing things out of frame can be more effective than showing it, like in Funny Games. This is not one of those situations, despite the interview of the director saying, oh, it's actually better because it's PG-13. Like, okay, cope. When they don't show something in this film, it always feels like a cheating, like, oh, okay, you're just not going to show it. It never feels like, oh, that's more effective because I'm imagining what's happening. It's really difficult to imagine something happening when it's so poorly communicated in the first place. When it's so terribly communicated with the editing and the sound choices and what you're doing visually, it doesn't really give a lot of room to be able to have that imagination taking place. Terrible script, shit script, terrible script. Here's one of my biggest gripes with this film, is it's not even a terrible concept, and it's not even like a terrible design for like the villain or whatever. It's not a terrible concept to have this sort of, oh, it's Chucky, but it's like the size of a girl or something. It's like a real doll or something. That's not a terrible concept, and I was kind of excited with James Wan attached to it because James Wan is great at taking these kind of cheesy, you know, like Malignant, these concepts, and making them a bit more engaging and fun. And this movie just, it wasn't fun. It wasn't satisfying. It was just so fucking boring. I feel like if James Wan had directed this would be a very different movie. And so yeah, now I'm kind of the mindset that Gerard Johnstone is just not a very competent director at all. Housebound is probably going to be the best thing he ever makes, which is not even like a great movie. I know some people really loved it, but it's very mid. Yeah, I wish James Wan would have directed this one. The information being communicated through the language of filmmaking is just, everything just feels like a fucking waste. Just so poorly communicated. Awful editing, awful directing. Just framing sucks. Too many cuts. All of the acting shit. Like, I'm just going in circles because that's all there is to the movie. It's just, everything is just unprofessional looking. Everything. It feels like a movie where they had every resource to be able to turn it into something that was half decent, but the people involved, especially the people at the reins, aka the director, was just so incompetent and untalented that it just did not turn out well at all. So I'm giving this one a M3GAN out of 10. And you know what? I didn't even think I was like, you know, there were parts of the movie where I thought I was just going to make the same joke and it would be M4GAN. So I wasn't even trying to necessarily give this a M3GAN out of 10. I thought I could have just made the same joke, M7GAN out of 10. Yeah, would have made the same joke no matter what, but it's genuinely a 3GAN. It's genuinely a M3GAN out of 10. So 3 out of 10. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to me ramble about movies. Love y'all. Thank you. Bye-bye. And what about Kat's behavior is upsetting you? The way she dresses. Oh. I'm not talking to you. No! Ew!